Hey everyone, this is Chris Garin. Do you guys still remember Friendster? The social networking website that came before MySpace and Facebook? Well, apparently, Friendster launched 3 years ahead of Facebook, but then, out of nowhere, it just disappeared. And we all completely forgot about it. Like, remember when you could write someone a testimonial? There was this practice in Friendster where you get to write nice things about a person on their profile, which sounds good, right? But then it was common practice for people to actually ask for a testimonial. It's the equivalent of being given a compliment because the other person meant it or wanted to, rather than asking a person to give you a compliment. And this was pretty normal in Friendster. But then, now that I think about it, wasn't it a bit sad that we had to ask people to tell us what's nice about us? Just the level of ass-kissing was over the top, and it was universally accepted in Friendster. Friendster, for a period of time, was the place to be, especially in the Philippines. And it's funny to know that its popularity here in the Philippines and in Southeast Asia was actually a contributing factor as to why it collapsed. So what happened to Friendster, and where did it all go wrong? But before anything else, please do know that you can listen to this episode on our podcast. Just search for Brand Origins on your favorite podcast app. And to get the latest updates, please follow us on Instagram. Friendster was launched on March 22, 2002 in California, USA by Jonathan Abrams, an American software engineer. And the name Friendster, it's just a portmanteau of friend and Napster. The peer-to-peer file sharing site Napster, of course, was a household name then. Take note that Friendster's launch was before MySpace and Facebook, so if you're the social type online, Friendster was your home. There was no competition that could match Friendster, and Friendster reached 1 million members within a couple of months from its launch date, and 6 months later, it reached 4 million members. Friendster's rise was quite explosive, and in comparison, it took Facebook 10 months to reach 1 million users. So then, they start getting media attention. Like, Friendster would get mentions in talk shows, radio shows from celebrities, and magazines such as the Rolling Stones, Newsweek, Vanity Fair. They just started getting press. And all this media attention, it fueled Friendster's exponential growth even further. And this is a good thing, right? Growth is good. This is the one thing that companies want, to grow. Well, not quite, because apparently, they were growing way too fast. And at this point, Friendster was only a company of around 10 employees. So basing from an interview from the Startup podcast, Jonathan Abrams, the founder of Friendster and CEO at that time, shares that a big part of the problem why they weren't able to handle growth was because the technology back then wasn't as readily available as it is today. When you have more users, you need more servers. And unlike today, where you can simply click a button and get access to 10 new servers in a couple of minutes, back then, if you need 10 servers, you needed to call a company and order those servers, and you need to pick it up from their office and take it to a data center. Basically, it's just a lot more work. And Abrams shared that he was actually the one doing it in the early days. And this is just one of the many areas that today might not be a problem, but at that time was very time consuming to do. Because of this, these delays caused performance issues, such as waiting around 2 minutes for a page to load. You know, when I read this, I'm like, seriously? It's 2002 and Americans are complaining about 2 minutes of load time for a web page. I live in the Philippines, and in 2002, my connection then was dial-up. And I could only dream of 2 minutes of load time, which we will discuss later on because this will actually play a role. Now, considering their growth rate at that time, they simply could not move fast enough to accommodate the growth. And so it came to a point when the Friendster team actually went from how do we grow into how do we slow down growth. Like, they actually were trying to find ways on how to stop people from visiting the site and new users from signing up. So, are you guys familiar with those emails that brands send out? Friendster used to have one where they update you with how many friends you have. It's a way to encourage you to add more people and for you to invite more friends in your network. So yeah, they actually turned that one off. And then they also had this feature where you get to see friends you may know. So they turned that one off too. And then they started rejecting invitations for brand features and interviews, just to stop the growth. But the users just kept coming. New users weren't the only ones chasing Friendster. Investors started knocking. Friendster was showing promising signs of becoming the next big thing in the world. And so before, Abrams was the one chasing investors, and now investors are chasing him. And Friendster was only a year and a half old then. John Doerr of Kleiner Perkins, the guy who invested early in Google, Netscape, and Amazon, he was chasing after Friendster too. But it gets better, because you know who else wanted to acquire Friendster? Google. How flattering must it be to be running a company that Google wants to acquire, huh? But Google, that time, it wasn't as big yet. It was founded in 1998, so they're not as big as they are today, but they were already quite sizable. Big enough to offer to acquire Friendster for $30 million. And since at that point, Google hasn't gone public yet, that would have been equivalent to Google shares that would have been worth hundreds of millions of dollars today. And so Jonathan Abrams had a decision to make. Sell to Google, exit, and take the $30 million now, or get funding from venture capital investors and build a billion-dollar company. So yeah, at first glance, this is one of the things that you would headline read and just judge as a bad call. Initially, I even thought it was a stupid decision to not sell to Google. Kinda like how Yahoo, during its peak, rejected Microsoft's offer of $44 billion. But now, learning about this, I'm putting myself in Jonathan Abrams' shoes. Should I sell and exit now for only $30 million? Or should I get the money I need to build Friendster, who right now is on top of the world? Unsurprisingly, Jonathan Abrams went for VC funding instead. Kleiner Perkins and Benchmark Capital, who invested in Uber, Snapchat, Dropbox, Twitter, Instagram, they put in $13 million in Friendster. And in return, Jonathan Abrams gave up some shares and some voting rights. And this is when things take a big turn. You see, when you get VC funding, you also relinquish some control. These venture capitalists, VCs, want to make sure that they get their money back. So they want these companies to be run the way they see fit. Not long after the investment, Jonathan Abrams was informed that he was going to be replaced. And it's a bit heartbreaking, really. Abrams said that 5 months earlier, these same investors were courting him. And now, they had just fired him. And enter one of the factors of Friendster's demise: leadership. Jonathan Abrams was replaced by Scott Sassa, a wunderkind CEO who's made a mark in the TV industry. So he had a bit of know-how on how to make money through advertising. And I'm guessing that the VCs thought, why not bring in someone who knows how to make money through ads, since Friendster's main revenue stream was advertising? But Friendster employees, they didn't believe this. They knew that it was a horrible idea to hire a media guy to run a tech company. And because of the lack of trust in the vision, and I'm guessing because of the new CEO's inability to be a good leader, power struggles emerged, and office politics entered the picture. Since leadership had no vision that the team can believe in, office politics took root because employees had their own opinion on how to best move the company forward. To make matters worse, while people at Friendster were busy with office gossip, power struggles, and lack of leadership, a competitor was busy rising. And this company was MySpace. It's sad that the reason why MySpace was launched was because its founders, Chris DeWolf and Tom Anderson, were both just frustrated with their experience with Friendster. They said that they found Friendster way too slow and that it had too many rules as to what people can and can't post. So like, they would find their profiles get taken down often. And although Friendster had these features later on, MySpace first introduced options like being able to customize your profiles with different colors, backgrounds, and even with music playing on your profile. Plus, MySpace pages loaded very quickly, and that's because it was run as a project while the founders were working with a big tech company called e-Universe. And because of this, they had access to server capacity, capital, and infrastructure. So they didn't have the same problems that Friendster had. And despite still being number one, Friendster's lead was being threatened by the rise of MySpace. Friendster decided to make a move. They decided that it might be wise for them to acquire their smaller competitors. And you know which competitor Friendster could have acquired? A tiny little startup that's working on a small social networking website. And it's being run by some 19-year-olds from Harvard. Sound familiar? Well, it's Facebook. At that time, Friendster was so much bigger than Facebook. And they saw that Facebook was actually doing pretty well. Like, they had good engagement numbers, but they were tiny compared to Friendster. And so Friendster people were even all like, why are we going to pay them $10 million? They're just two kids. So they made their offer, but Mark Zuckerberg probably thought that it wasn't big enough. And take note that Mark Zuckerberg was also talking to investors at that time. And Zuckerberg, like Jonathan Abrams, had a vision. I think this is what you can get from the actual founder and not from a replacement CEO. Just a clear and sincere vision and the heart to pursue it. And that's what Friendster lost when they fired Jonathan Abrams. Mark Zuckerberg had a vision of what he saw Facebook becoming, and so he went for the investors and started building. And with that, Friendster lost its chance to acquire Facebook. Here comes another problem for Friendster. One of Friendster's engineers noticed something. He notices a surge in traffic and website visits, but then he sees that the peak traffic was at around 2 a.m. and this is a US-based time zone. So he found it a bit odd that there's this surge of traffic at 2 a.m. And then he discovered that all these website visitors were coming from the Philippines. Yes guys, be proud. We are part of Friendster's history. But don't be too proud because we are also part of the reason why Friendster died. So here's what happened. Because Friendster was getting so popular in the Philippines, I mean like too popular. By 2004, almost 50% of Friendster's new users were coming from the Philippines. So at first you may think, hey, that's nice, you're getting new users. But here's the thing. Since it's from the Philippines, Americans were starting to get drowned out. A source compares it to entering a room and everyone there is Filipino and you're the only one who's not. What would you do? You'd surely feel out of place, so you would want to get out. Apparently, Friendster would be filled with topics that only Filipinos can relate to because it's mostly Filipinos there, and it was starting to erode traffic from everywhere else in the world. And Friendster engineers, they were thinking, should we just block the traffic from the Philippines? Because this doesn't only hurt the chances of Friendster getting more users from the US, it also hurts Friendster's primary revenue stream. You see, Friendster earns from ads, but brands only pay for ads if it's the right audience. In this case, US brands will pay for ads that will get them US-based customers. But since Filipinos are slowly invading Friendster, leaving less and less users from the US, Friendster's audience started to become less attractive to advertisers. But aside from blocking traffic from the Philippines, they couldn't do anything about it, and by 2005, Friendster became the most visited site in the Philippines, Indonesia, and second in Malaysia and Singapore. And in 2006, Friendster actually opened a headquarters in Manila. I had no idea, and considering us Filipinos, who usually makes a big deal of things when it comes to us being the #1 in the world at something, I'm surprised that being the #1 country in the world that caused the death of Friendster isn't celebrated as much. The problems kept mounting, and Friendster simply could not put out the fires and make bolder moves for the future. And by 2006, MySpace took the lead from Friendster and became the biggest social network in the US. Friendster, now ranked in second place, its board of directors made a decision that it was probably just best to sell Friendster. By 2008, Friendster had 115 million users, a majority of which is from Southeast Asia. Also in 2008, Facebook surpassed MySpace. And by 2009, Friendster was acquired for over $24 million by MOL Global, a tech company in Asia. It was during the same year when it rebranded for the green logo with a scribbly look that I'm not particularly fond of, but okay. By 2011, it switched directions and turned itself into a social gaming site. But then, this didn't really amount to anything. And by June 14, 2015, Friendster's website and all its services shut down indefinitely. It still continued to operate until June 2018, but then, after that, the Friendster brand simply vanished, thus completing the fall of Friendster. But you know who benefited the most from this? Facebook. Because it's as if all they had to do was to learn from Friendster's mistakes. Friendster became a cautionary tale that Facebook was paying attention to. In fact, in the movie about Facebook, the social network, there was a line there where I think Mark Zuckerberg says something like, we just have to not become Friendster. One of the things that Friendster did wrong and Facebook did right was to manage their growth. Facebook grew in a much more controlled way. It just started with Harvard, then it moved on to another university, and then another. And they just had to add a new server every time they added another university. And so their growth, it was manageable. Since growth was manageable, they were able to focus on building a user experience that people loved. They weren't so obsessed about pushing in banner ads and other advertising opportunities just yet. Facebook's focus was simplified into 7 friends in 10 days. The Facebook team focused on adding features to the site and improving the user experience to the point that it would help connect a user to 7 friends in 10 days. It's a clear goal, it's simple, and it's measurable. And they just kept hitting it. Most importantly, what Facebook had that Friendster didn't have? A good leader. Friendster had 6 CEOs in 7 years, whereas Facebook, in its entire lifetime, just 1. One founder with a clear, focused, and singular vision of the company's future. Honestly, I think if they didn't get rid of Jonathan Abrams, Friendster would have made it further. Maybe not as big as Facebook, but it would have been more significant. But I guess we'll never know. So that's about it, guys. Now you know about the rise and fall of Friendster. We rely heavily on word of mouth, so if you like this episode, please tell your friends about brand origins. Our channel is still really small, so every subscription, it really means a lot to us. Oh, and check out our brand disaster series on our podcast. Just search for brand origins on any podcast app. This is Chris Garin. I'll catch you again next time on another episode of Brand Origins.